And so we are so thrilled to have Mitch Wade here as our guest speaker. And Mitch has been really involved with the FSHD Society for a while and has done many sessions with us before. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself a bit more, Mitch, and you can let us know what you have going on before we get started.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's always fun to come on here and, chat with a whole bunch of people. So hopefully some of the recordings can get out to some more people as well. But just wanted to introduce myself a little bit and, how I really got started with this whole process of, one, training, and then, of course, getting into training people with FSHD. It was originally, just kind of being linked in with the gym and comfortable with the gym, and I like the atmosphere, and I think that's something that, I like to teach as well, is creating the atmosphere. So, we'll go into that a little bit more, but I fell into that, that zone of, creating friends through gym and creating workout classes and stuff like that, and it became a, lifestyle pattern. So then, of course, eventually I started training friends and family members. And then I realized I spent so much time in the gym, I might as well maybe look into doing it as a job. So that brought me into, getting into a big gym and having fun with all sorts of different clients. And then I met somebody named Bill, and I should refer to him more specifically as Dr. Herzberg. He is a wonderful man that I met probably at this point, probably 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 5, something like that. I've had a couple of kiddos the last few years, so time has been a little crazy for me. But Bill and I met at a big gym, 24-hour fitness. And he kind of came in and said, this is where I'm at. This is what I've got. This is what I know. Bill is a very knowledgeable physician, neurologist, and he spent a lot of time, researching and studying and figuring out what the FSHD is and why and how it affects and, what we can do about it. So Bill came in looking for somebody that he assumed probably wouldn't be very familiar with the disease, as I was not, and said, I need somebody that's maybe got a good baseline of knowledge of the body, and knows what to do, but is also willing to learn. So luckily I got chose, and then Bill and I, the next, few years really just kind of tackled it together. It was a lot of learning experiences. It was a lot of, successes and some things that didn't work too. And I think the things that didn't work, I like to always elaborate on that a little bit. I think it's what got us to where we're at here. It takes challenges. You've got to put yourself into uncomfortable zones to create change. And that's what we did, so I would say sometimes we maybe chose an exercise that was maybe not able to be achieved, but also there's sometimes that you choose an exercise that's maybe it's just not the right time for that too. So you've got to have stages, be comfortable with the sense that exercise is not, you're not replacing joints, we're not getting rid of FSHD, it's still going to be present. We're learning how to deal with it and handle with it and, enhance really what, is affecting us. And movement is key. And what we really found is figuring out what movements, what muscles, are working at the same time, so for just like an example, if we're walking, there's a lot of muscles that are firing. There's a lot of important things all the way from the feet up to the ankles, to the knees, to the hips, to the mid-spine, upper shoulders and the neck. So it all goes together, and that was a big factor of exercises that we chose. We would find things that are multi-joint, multi-directional, multi-plane, getting challenges, but you can't just start in the biggest challenges either. So we had to find some, rather baseline, boring, sometimes what people call it, exercises, but it was beneficial, so this is where I really talk about the atmosphere and creating a want to exercise, a want to move, even if it is challenging. Now, something that Bill and I started with a whole bunch, and I like to talk about this, is he didn't even stand, so we just stayed seated for a long time. And that made him feel confident because the balance wasn't necessarily present, and we're doing this in front of people too. So that was a huge step, for him to kind of say, hey, I'm willing to be in front of, other people coming to this gym. It's okay if they judge me. And, unfortunately people do. And that's some of the uncomfortable parts that we just have to say, I'm here for the right reasons. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to work hard and I'm going to make some change. And, that's anybody and everybody in the gyms. I talk about that with a lot of people, from all different ages. Doesn't matter, your abilities of this or that. It can be tough sometimes going into a big gym like that and starting the process, starting the journey. So going back to Bill sitting down, we probably worked that way for, a couple of months. And it was getting into what was working with the scapula. The scapulas are definitely huge, things that are affected. FSHD, obviously, we are included there with the scapula. And a lot of questions that I tend to get as well, whether it's on Instagram or the webinars that people are, wondering. Scapular winging is very, very, it's a popular topic. It's very affected, in the FSHD group, but I would also say it affects a lot of people because of our tendency of being at computers and being, kind of a forward rounded position. That's not just my FSHD group at all, so I talk about scapular winging and postural effects on a daily basis. So I like to elaborate that to Bill, and I did it right away. And I didn't really know, but we were kind of talking about that, where it's like, hey, we're not just doing this because you have FSHD. We're doing this because all of us should do it. We should all learn how to incorporate our rib cage and our scapula meaning our shoulder blade, just to be a little more specific. All those things work as a team. And if they don't work as a team, let's teach it. And if it's, not doable on your own, find somebody. Find a physio, find a physical, find a fitness trainer, find a friend, find a significant other. There's a lot of options that we can do. It's just more so you got to have the willingness to do it. And that's a lot of times, like I was saying, the tough part, getting in the gym or having the plan, and there is something I wanted to mention too. I saw on just the introduction, it was my personal Instagram page, which is A-OK. You guys can look on that too. It's more of just my family and stuff like that. So another one is FSH Fitness. So it's at, like, if you type it in there, at FSH Fitness, you'll see some posts that we've put on there. I've probably done about 10, I'd say, something like that. Mostly just in the sense that I used this when I was using the webinars. So I would go on there and, screen share, and you guys would see what Bill and I were doing. So we need to get better at doing more. I've had some crazy, awesome success with, views and stuff when I post something. So the intent eventually is to try to, create a workout class that people can log into. I think Zoom would be great, and do a little bit of what we're talking about here, but some more specifics, trying to guide you into point A to point B and then to C and D, but again, we've got to start at point A. So the FSH Fitness Instagram page definitely has a couple of those, of some simpler things that Bill and I started with, and one specifically that does come to mind is there's one that we were seated in a very pretty background, so you'll definitely notice it's not a gym. I think it's the only one that's not in the gym. And it's me and Bill. Bill's sitting down again, and we have a dowel. So it's probably 6 feet tall. I got it from Home Depot. I think it was about $7. Don't spend any more or look somewhere else. And I have the bottom on the ground and have his hand on, and I'm just being the opposing force. So the bottom is on the ground. It's locked in, kind of tight. And he's just pushing and he's pulling. We do this, I would say, honestly, every single time I see him, we do it. And it's usually just for more of it's a time that we catch up and we get the shoulder blades moving. And that is so valuable for his postural effects of getting the arm bone, the shoulder blade, and the rib cage to do what we need to do. Did we know that right away? No, we didn't have that exercise right away. We found it, it sounds pretty simple, but it's extremely effective. It's so effective. We've done it, every single time we've seen each other for the last probably 2 or 3 or 4 years. So, you've got to dig in a little bit and find the difficulties. If it's extremely difficult, try to find something a little simpler. If you can't find anything, that's when you look out for, or you reach out to somebody. There are physical therapists and physiotherapists that know the body just like I do. They might not know the disease necessarily, but that's more where you can look into some of these, webinars that I've done and other people too. I've watched a whole bunch of them. People know a lot about this disease now. It's great, and the research is really showing that muscles and movements can definitely be correlated together and have change, create change. It's not just deterioration. It's not just dystrophy. It's not just going away. We can at least manage it. And and I'm saying that, in a lot of confidence because I know with many of my clients that I've worked with, we've changed it. I just don't want to promise you something because it is hard work. Bill put in a lot of work. And I will say that, very strongly that his efforts were there. He had to be there morning and night. He had to, think about what he was doing and change some effects of how he was walking and how he was doing things in compensation. Compensation is a huge deal. Our bodies are very good at it. We take the path of least resistance as often as we can, but it's not always the best. And again, that's whether it's FSHD or anybody else that's maybe saying, "Hey, I've got some knee pain." And I say, "Well, you're doing this when you walk every time, and you might not realize it, but why don't we try to fix that?" And I say, "Well, that's really hard." Say, well, okay, and usually I usually finish that up by saying, well, I think it's a good thing that we find things that we can work on, because if we didn't find anything that we could work on, then I'm not really sure what to tell you. There's a lot of area for growth. There's a lot of areas to step into and say, do I have to be doing bench press? Do I have to be doing these things that we kind of correlate with the gym? Not at all. I have a bench press, but I rarely do it with a lot of people. It's not necessarily needed. So treadmills, bench presses, leg presses, things like that, and doing certain amounts of craziness of miles, a lot of that is a little bit more of the misconception of exercise and how we need to create some change. Another big topic here is usually the core. Okay, so anybody, open topics when we have, podcast. How do we work our core? How do we do this? How do I get a stronger core? Well, for one, we all have abs. They are there. Sometimes we just have some things covering them up. Okay, so that can be done from a lot of different things. That can be controlled from obviously nutrition, calorie in, calorie out. That's another time, another conversation. We can have that, of course. But when we talk about postural effects and core, and then utilizing our core the way we can, we have to be in a relatively appropriate posture. Now, with FSHD, we sometimes find lower abdominals to be weak. And that is something that Bill and I addressed very strongly. So we would get him into positions a little bit like the dowel push and pull that I was explaining earlier. And we would use this on a regular, and it would, again, be kind of the time that we would be catching up. It's the warm-up little sets for us, but we get so used to it that he started doing it on his own on the days that I don't see him. And that's the point. We're trying to create habits. We're trying to create lifestyle patterns and changes. You don't need to change everything. You don't need to not eat pizza if you want to. I mean, I eat pizza. I'll have a burger. I'm not crazy here just because I, like fitness. I eat those things too, and I drink those things too. But it's all in regulation. You've got to control what you're doing, but we also need to move. I think exercise and movement is just as important as breakfast and brushing your teeth. It doesn't need to be an hour in the morning, but I think you could probably give yourself 5 minutes of a couple of things that I call WD-40 or activation exercises. And my assumption for you for the rest of the day, you're going to be moving more efficiently than as if you didn't do that. So again, those are habits. Those are things that we set up for ourselves to create success. And then we have to have other times that maybe you do go into the gym. You can go and do bench press. You can go and do leg press. You can go and do all those things that I mentioned. They're not bad. It's just not a must. So if we're just looking to make ourselves move better and feel better, there's a lot of things that we can do. So going back to the core, there's an exercise called the dead bugs, and it's somewhat self-explanatory. You lay on your back, kind of like a bug when it's dead. And the legs are up, the hands are up. Sometimes we can't get that to be fully achieved, so we make some adjustments. Okay, with Bill specifically, we have a little bit of a harder time getting the arms to be overhead there. So we'll just cross the arms, almost hands on the opposite shoulders, okay? And we still try to remain those legs, the knees mostly above the hips with the feet off the ground. So it is a 90-degree angle. If you're envisioning this, you're on your back, your hips are at 90, your knees are at 90, so your feet are the same level as your knees, okay? Now, if we have a hard time doing this, you're gonna want to gravitate those knees towards your chest, which then with gravity, it does something called a posterior tilt of your pelvis. And that is not a horrible thing as it helps you get into that position, but then you want to try to improve that, almost let those knees go farther away without allowing the pelvis to then rise up to the sky. And that is from our lower abdominals. It's from a lot of our core muscles, but our lower abdominals fire a lot there. And that was something that we got so used to. We would work on our breathing. I find breathing to be very, very, very important when it comes to postural effects. So breathing into the diaphragm, breathing with the lower ribs. I tell them to flare the ribs outwards, especially the lower ribs, when we're in that position. Connect the core. Teach your body how to connect your breathing and the movements all together. Sometimes it sounds really basic, but then you get into it. I always love that exercise. Well, say to a client, I say, all right, we're going to do this, this, and this. They say, okay. So then they get in and they're kind of thinking it's just going to be like a cakewalk because it didn't really sound like all that much. But then once the breathing gets in there and you feel some of those deeper diaphragmatic muscles firing and working and stabilizing, you'll be tired. You don't have to go and do the treadmill. You don't have to go and do X, Y, and Z just because maybe the magazine said that or your friend did it. Find what's going to be best for you. And two things so far: scapula stability and movement and lower abdominal weakness. So the dead bugs are two big, big staples that Bill and I used all the time when it came to our beginning, our beginning of our journey. Now, what if you have too much? If you have too much and you're trying to just juggle everything, you've got maybe one person saying this, one person saying that, or you want to try all this, you're just kind of getting overwhelmed with like, okay, where do I start? A lot of times with all my clients, again, start at the feet. Balance is huge. Now, something I'd love to share with, clients of anybody really is when Bill met me, there was something that was a continuous pattern for him. And I wasn't really necessarily aware of it. He didn't share that with me. But I'd say about a year and a half or so into it, maybe a little longer, he did share with me and said, I don't have a scab on my knees because it's been long enough that I haven't fallen. So that's a long time. That's not just a week. That's not just 2 weeks, maybe. But I mean, he hadn't fallen in, a while, to the point where he hadn't had any scabs. And he goes, I usually always have, something. And that was big. That was really, really big for me in the sense of, we're really just talking about balance and stability. So when I first started with Bill, I want to give him the whole home run. I want to give him every piece of the pie that he can say, wow, this guy this is great. It doesn't need to be the whole pie. You don't need that much. A little bit goes a long ways. So again, working with the feet, I have people stand. I did it today with someone. This gentleman was 86 years old. We have changed the way he walks. And that's what he always likes to talk about. He's like, man, I just don't walk the same. And a lot of what we did to begin with was just standing on 2 feet in certain positions, making sure the hips were in alignment, making sure he was breathing, and he got comfortable with it. And we did that for months. And now it's like actual developing into a walking pattern. And that again, Bill and I did the exact same thing. We got him onto his feet after we sat in the box for a while, because again, he needed that confidence levels. And we just had him stand there. We would focus on stability. We would focus on other things. We would give him distractions sometimes. I'd come up and maybe nudge him a little bit, not hard. I mean, it doesn't need to be there. It's more about stability against distractions, against gravity, against maybe stepping off of a curb or missing a curb, or just kind of having to step quick feet and having the mindfulness and the proprioception of where to put the foot in the next step without going too far forward. It only happens with practice. Just like anything else, whether it's a sport or gymnastics or a dance, you've got to practice. You've got to teach your body how to do it. Now, is it a little bit not, lack there of motivation when you feel your body changing? Absolutely, and I would say I deal with that with any and all of my clients, with whether it's age or this or something changed here. I had an injury here. I had this develop. I had this. I still have the same approach no matter what. Let's work on it. What can we do? Instead of focusing on what we can't do, let's focus on what we can do there and get some ideas rolling. And I said this again, to somebody today. I really have never had anybody say they don't feel a little better, or have created some change if we keep it simple and we look at what they need, as an individual, not just again what maybe they saw on social media or what they saw on some magazine or what the doctor even told them type deal. Not to say the doctors are wrong at all, but just let's search for what's going to be best for you. And sometimes something super, super simple goes a long ways. So hopefully that kind of makes a little sense there too. Going with the support groups, that's another thing I wanted to touch on again. Support groups are fantastic. Having a workout class to go to or something like that, I think is a great idea. Knowing the basics though first is also very important. If we are moving too much or moving into ranges of motion that your body is not ready for, you can get hurt. So, be smart there of knowing what steps to take, knowing how to take those steps, and again, if you don't know, ask somebody maybe what they think would be a good spot for you to start. And if you don't really know, that's where I'm looking to kind of start that workout class too, to be able to kind of start where the basics would be. Getting into the feet, getting into the hips. If you can't stand, let's sit. If you can't do that, let's lay on your back. If you can't do that, let's lay in a bed. There's kind of an options for anybody and everybody. I had a client about 3 years ago, had an accident falling over his dog and became a partial paraplegic from T6 and down. 2.5 years later, he's now walking again. So we were in a bed for 1.5 years. Now, is that FSHD and is that different situations? It is, but I approach it the same. Let's work on it. There's things to do. There's something out there that can make you trigger muscles and enhance, actual growth in there. And I've now seen that with actual studies and tests done with multiple of my FSHD clients where there's actual changes in their muscle growth. And it's not just diminishing. Now, a line that I say a lot, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And I highly believe in that. And I think that's anybody and everybody. And it can be hard to get started, but again, that is really just the baseline. We have to get in there. You have to find somebody if you need. You have to create a workout system and a routine. And those are just habits. They're hard to create, but they're, once you feel a little bit of the effect, it's definitely a motivating part. And that's, for the most part with exercise, intrinsic motivation is just as important as extrinsic. When it comes to now strength, this is another question that I made a note here that I wanted to cover. I do believe that if you over push something, you can strain something. So with some of the research, it says, if you strength train too aggressively, or if you do something like this, it might, make the pace of dystrophy, go faster. I wouldn't focus too much there. If there are certain numbers still present there, that can really be, there's a lot of variables there. Now, I think if you get your body used to it, just kind of like almost like skiing, if you go skiing, you are very, very sore. If you go hiking maybe for the first day, or you do anything that's a little bit outside of the norm, are you sore? You could be. Now, does that diminish? Does it become less and less if we work on it? For the most part, yes, I've found some good results there too. Now, if you just do 1,000 repetitions of some jumping jacks or overhead swings with the TRX, which you could maybe see me do on my Instagram, which I just told you is a great exercise to do, 1,000 reps and you haven't done any in the last year, I'm going to say it's probably not the smartest idea. So we've always got to be mindful as to, is it too much? Now, with the actual research that they've been showing, that is something that definitely a lot of things are changing. And now you can see some actual strength training getting into FSHD, groups of people working in. I do a lot of kettlebell work with Bill. Okay, I do a lot of dumbbell work with Bill. There's certain things that we can do. There's certain things that we got to kind of modify a little bit. But we've had extreme changes. He's probably gone up, I'd say. Actually, that's really hard to count there. But with stability and the lack thereof, he was kind of going, I don't think I can do this at first. And now we just kind of walk up and grab a X amount of weight, and it's just normal now. And he's gotten used to it. It's taken time, but I don't find it to have an actual effect on if you're being smart. You've got to be mindful to it. Now, how do we be smart? Well, give it a shot and do a very little bit of repetitions or amount and see how it feels. Now, if the next day you have horrible correlation to how it feels awful, you feel like maybe it's just pain in the joints, try to adjust something. I wouldn't just quit. I wouldn't just say, it's not good for me. Maybe try to adjust something, either less repetitions, different form, breathing, postural effects. Can we change something there? That's what I would give an approach for first, before just saying, I can't ever run, I can't ever walk, I can't ever squat. Because those movements are key movements to everyday life. Whether we're going to the store or walking from a room to a room, or even just getting up out of the chair or using the restroom. We want to be able to continue to do those things. So we have to be able to somewhat practice it in some way. Like, again, I said, there's a TRX. There are assisted, bars that you can hold. There's hydraulic lifts. There's an answer and an exercise for everybody out there. It just takes work. So, I keep coming kind of back to that, looping back in there. The bottom line is it's work. It's hard to be fit. It's hard to do some of those things, but it can also be hard to not be able to do those too. Do we have pain somewhere? Well, I can tell you a lot. I mean, pain debilitates people, mentally and physically, I'd say too, which is a tough part. And then the inability of being able to do things, that can get us into a mental and physical kind of, downfall. This always kind of reminds me too, when I talk about that. Another example with Bill, when we first met each other, he definitely was not able to do this. And then a few years later, he said, Mitch, I need you to keep a secret. And I said, okay. And he goes, I'm able to unload the dishes now. He goes, but don't tell my wife. And I said, my man, that is awesome. That's very cool. And that is the ability of getting overhead. That is the ability of reaching, up into at least his shoulder level with control. And that was not able to happen when we first met. Drinking water, eating, those things were much more difficult. And those are things that, we want to be able to do for the rest of our lives. And technically we need to. You're going to need water and food. You're going to need to be able to go to the restroom as much as you can on your own. So a lot of those things are just things that are not necessarily focuses to try to be as strong as you can. It's about how to be as functional as you can, and continue to have that quality of life that you choose to, and there's an answer out there. It just takes some time. It takes some effort and work. And I do find that finding somebody that can kind of lead you down that path first with a little bit of guidance, it really, really helps, and that comes from myself of having a lot of coaches when I was young. I had some good coaches, and I had some coaches that I wouldn't say were bad people, but just weren't my favorite coaches. And, I remember those good coaches. I remember those good mentors that taught me some things that I keep with me, until this day. And those are habits. Those are habits that we create, and those are habits that, if you want to, you can create too. It's just getting into that position and kind of figuring out what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you. But yes, it can definitely be difficult. And again, it's definitely work. So we covered a little bit of the core. We talked about the scapula. I wanted to make sure I went over, some of the things that can be done onto what people, have been talking about with the research and how the research is talking, saying that it will, amp up the pace of FSHD. Now, I can't promise either one. I've never seen it get worse, and I have seen it get better, but I just don't know enough about those deep, scientific researches of kind of more quantitative measurements that maybe it does show some dystrophy still happening. I just don't push any of my clients like that. I don't really believe that being a drill sergeant, all day long or any of the day is really, maybe a couple, is really the most beneficial for my clients. And that's anybody and everybody. I find a lot of us we live busy lives. I mean, the cost of living is not as cheap as it used to be. We all have our jobs. We all maybe, if there's kids involved, if there's whatever things going, there's a lot of action that we have to try to balance. So when there's opportunities to maybe beat them up because they feel good, right? Rock and roll, I mean, our bodies do like to push, but on a consistent basis, we like to be taught how to move. And that's what I usually like to kind of go on is teaching instead of torturing. It is a great approach right away. Torturing is not necessarily going to get you anywhere. And then you're not really going to correlate the sense of the mental aspect to of, man, this is fun. Because it's usually not that fun, So you've got to find those classes that you enjoy doing, those exercises that you enjoy doing. The TRX is definitely something that Bill ended up buying one of those and putting it in his office. If you're not familiar with the TRX, it's those like black and yellow straps that you'll see at gyms sometimes. I've seen other brands now too, of course. Just they usually hang from some kind of a solid apparatus or a door. They come down and they have two handles. Some TRX moves are to make it harder with the TRX. Some of it is just for support, and I like both of them. So with Bill, the exercises that I posted most recently about the scapular winging, like I was mentioning earlier, we did a couple of our go-to exercises on the TRX. The very first one is TRX rainbows. It is really just reaching straight up and then down to your hips, get in the appropriate position to where your shoulders and your chest feel good and it's a good stretch. Postural position doesn't want to be compromised just by doing the exercise. So if you take a look at that exercise, you'll see about what it looks like. The tension on the TRX is what allowed Bill to be able to go up and hold it. And now when getting, kind of pushing against the strap that's pulling him back, that allowed for a lot of our muscle called the lat. It's a muscle that's connected from the shoulder down to the hips, and a huge muscle for postural, positioning and force and shoulder function, really in general. And with the scapula being winged and the shoulders usually losing some function, a lot of times I see the caving inwards. So the shoulders rolling forward. Now, the lats being engaged really help. They attach to the arm bone and a couple areas of the scapula. They pull those areas back. So we have to get more, acquainted with that lat stretching and then that lat getting short. So a lot of this is probably, a little hard to visually see. So please look at that again. It's at FSH Fitness. It's on Instagram. And there's 3 of them on there. So the rainbow rotations, golf swings, it's just a single arm, very similar to what I was talking about, the rainbow rotations. It's messing with your arm bone, your scapula, and your rib cage. Now with the golf swing, he rotates a little bit. So now we're getting balance, down there too. These exercises are all standing. Okay, now it's pretty clear that when Bill and I started, we were not standing. So we've made it to these points. He can do things that he wasn't able to do, not just because of the sense of confidence, but because of the ability of being able to do it. And it just took some time, but we've made it. There's never been anything that we've gotten worse at. I can tell you that right now. And that is a big part, of understanding the process of, if you want to learn to jump better, you don't just jump. You find core strength, you find hip power, you find alignment, postural positions, so when you want to get better at something, find the little things that might add up to make that one thing a little bit better too. For a sport, if you want to be good at basketball, you're not just going to shoot far, you're not just going to do layups. If you want to be good at walking, I think you should be good at walking fast, and I think you should be good at walking slow. I think you should be good at balancing on one leg. I think you should be good at doing it on both the legs though too, meaning left leg and right leg. And that's a big thing that I see with all my clients. We have our favorite sides. We have our things that we do, more this way than the other way. And that's just being aware. So again, that's compensation. It can change our postural positions. It can change the way we do things. With FSH, that can be present too. So that's kind of my last bullet point that I wanted to talk about is asymmetries. Okay, now how do we deal with that? I'd say the exact same way we deal with anything else. Asymmetries are present because of the sense of a push and a pull to one direction. If we step to the right, our bodies change a little bit. If we swing a club, like a golf club, our bodies change a little bit because you're swinging to one way, not the other. So whether we can swing a club or if we do or don't like golf, that's not the point at all. It's more about making the sense of if you just had a 1 pound little blow up ball in your hand, I'd want you to throw that ball to the right. Then I want you to come back to the center. I want you to throw that ball to the left. If that ball doesn't go anywhere or we can't hold the ball, that's, again, not really the point. I'm not worried about where the ball goes yet. I'm worried about mechanics of your body. Now, when we throw the ball to the right and to the left, that's change of direction. So your body has to develop balance. It has to develop proprioception, which is knowing where your body is in space. And those are a lot of the more fun exercises. I consider them fun. Maybe they don't seem as fun necessarily to everybody, but they're more entertaining than just having someone say, hey, go on the treadmill for 12 minutes. Then let's go and sit down at the chest press. And it's not to say those are bad. They can work, but find what works best for you, and the bench press and the treadmill, have Bill and I done it, Yes, we have 100%. So it's not to say again that they're bad, but we find a lot of times that it's, I do something called the robot walk with him, where it's elbow to knee opposites. And it's just trying to get that, all the way down the line. There's a great warm up for you. It's be a little bit more spontaneous with what you pick, but have the basics. Your feet want to be in good contact. Your hips and knees need to be dialed in. Your shoulder blade, your arm bone, your rib cage, they need to be all working together. The core, we talked about the lower abs being a little bit weak in FSH. So, find those exercises that get those working. And then try to just stand tall and walk in the way that, walk in the way of using the muscles that you just activated from the warm-up muscles, the WD-40, like I mentioned, the dead bug, the golf swings, the TRX rainbows. I could go on. I don't want to just keep throwing exercises out there because you're not too familiar with what I'm necessarily talking about. But the bottom line is there's not one exercise or one routine that's gonna heal all, or else that would have already been out there. It's everybody is different. Some asymmetries might be, more on this side, the right side of the body from the next person with or without FSH than the left side asymmetries. What you want to find is when the knee bends and we pull the knee back, we use our hamstring. When the knee goes straight and we push our foot forward, we use our quad. When we do a flexion forward with our spine, we use our abs. So know what the function is there of each muscle, not each muscle, that's a lot, of some of the bigger muscles. And then it's easier to pick those exercises. It's easier to figure out how to keep things in good positions if you understand kind of the baseline knowledge, the basics. But there's, again, there's a lot to know. So that's where I would really recommend, fine tuning into somebody and saying, hey, I don't really know too much about this. I'd love to get some of your knowledge. I know some about this with FSH. Here's some of the patterns, bring some information to them and find somebody that's willing to maybe do a little research and find some good exercises. But the bottom line is a couple of things I would say on general, each client, when I leave them, I give them like one or two things to work on. And it's just to keep their brain thinking, keeping them to the point where they're getting dialed in with their feet if that's the focus, or their shoulders if that's the focus. One of my cues for a client today was breathe horizontally, not vertically. That was his homework for a week. So it's not to go out and walk 10 miles. Please do, go ahead if you want to. 10,000 steps, whatever your goals are, please, awesome, rock and roll. But have some things that are going to make you do those 10,000 steps better. Have some things that are going to make you do, maybe some of the compensatory movements that maybe you know about or have learned about, and find some cues that are going to make you do those differently or more efficiently. And the body usually has some really good response there. Perfect. Other than that, I could sit here and chat about exercises. I'd love to hear a little bit of feedback from maybe some people that want to hear something specific. If there's nothing, I can absolutely go into some more exercises and do my best to explain those. But does anybody have any questions at all?
Yeah, that was all helpful. I appreciate you sharing that. One question I did have is you mentioned one thing related to strength that you found the research maybe not to be accurate on. Obviously, you have a lot of experience dealing with actual patients. Are there any other things that we may have seen through other sources that you would say maybe aren't correct?
Yeah, good question. And I actually I want to almost backtrack a little bit. And I wouldn't say that those are not necessarily accurate, just because those variables can change so much. Let's say, a lot of the research studies that I would be reading is it's like a controlled variable, like they do a leg press or they do a cycle bike for a certain amount of time. Everyone is so different. So, there might be some numbers that go up, there might be some numbers that go down. But I could say that about somebody that if they hadn't done a cycle bike for a year and I had them come in and do 30 minutes, their knees are going to kill them the next day because their form and their potential of movement was not there. So it's really hard to say necessarily that the research is wrong. I don't want to say that necessarily because I just don't know enough about the quantitative measurements to confidently say that research is wrong. But what I can say from my experience with numerous sources is that I don't see people decline, and we do it in a smart manner. And the smart manner is really, as long as your body gets some good feedback from it, continue to introduce new things. It's almost like a child and getting them to eat food. You introduce one food for about a week. And that's more so because it's, see what the response of the body is. See what happens when we have this variable tossed in there. What happens? Does all of a sudden, does it feel like you have better stability? Can we give you 4 exercises and let you kind of feel that whole difference of, wow, I can actually feel my glutes turn on. I can feel my glute there. And then when you walk, the next 10,000 steps you did, hopefully that glute was working better. So to be a little bit more, I guess, specific on there, when we see muscles diminishing and getting weaker, I don't find it just to be the sense of the disease driving that down. I find it more so to be that we don't know how to utilize some of those bigger muscle groups because of how we've compensated our position and our posture to set up. So an example there is if we want to if we're walking, or if we want to do a lunge, or if we want to do a squat, and I call it your tripod, your big toe, your small toe, and your heel, and I see something losing contact or your knee really going far in, that inhibits your glute, your butt cheek, to work the way we want it to. So I have an exercise where I just put someone in a kneeling position, one knee down and one leg forward, and we just get the foot in contact to where the knee needs to be over the toes, get your body in position, and then in that position, if we're doing it right, we should feel our hip and glute activate. And then we just sit there for like 30 seconds. Now, when I say activate, I don't mean that when we get to 30 seconds, you're like, whew, man, that was tough. It's more like, yeah, it's there. I know how to do it. I now know where to be in that walking position or lunging or squatting position, and you're teaching the positions. Now, if we can teach the positions more often, that's when I start to see some good growth and change in the function of abilities of motions, whether it's stepping up on something or not falling and having scabs on his knees, or really anything like that. I see the function get better. So that's more of where I'll come from, instead of saying, is some of the muscle groups getting weaker because we see it quantitatively? Possibly. In all people, not necessarily. But if we see that, but yet the function and quality of life is still better, I'm going to have to say that the exercise was worth it, in my opinion. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, that was helpful.
Okay. One of my mentors that I follow, he has a really bad shoulder. Just for a quick story of here, 10 years ago, he went and got an MRI. I think 20 years ago, rather. MRI, doctor said get surgery. Doctor said do this. That's not to say that the doctor was wrong. It looked bad. He chose to go a little bit of a different route. He strength trained it. He functional trained it. And now he is still an elite trainer for baseball players and softball players. Now, he went back in for an MRI. Did it look better? It didn't. Not at all. It actually looked worse than the MRI previously. And that's not to say this is in everybody's case. This is just in his. He doesn't have any pain, and quality of life is just fine. So sometimes, an option of this or that is not always the right way. Try and maybe just move your body, move your body and learn how to move your body a little bit more, and see if that gives you some enhancement in something, some relief in something, some more ability to do something, and if it does, exercise for the most part, is not too expensive. I mean, if you're paying for somebody to help you, that can definitely be a little bit more, but, moving our body is free. Breathing the air is free, and drinking water is free. Mostly, not in all areas, but I live in Oregon, so we do have some good water here. But finding those simple things, again, is just where I like to guide people the most. You don't have to have a gym membership. I said the gym, you don't have to have that. You don't really even have to have a ton of equipment. Your body is probably the best piece of equipment you can have. Learn that and then grow from there. If you choose to want to get more, awesome. But just don't spend that dollar just because you think it's going to create the change of what and how to control your own body.
It looks like we have one question.
Yeah.
Christine, did you have one?
Yeah, I was just wondering, if you have any tips and pointers on how to find, a physiotherapist or anything. My neurologist and physiatrist, I think that's how you say it, I never say it right, are scared to have me see a physical therapist because they don't want me to see a regular physical therapist, just with how severe the damage is, especially my core muscles after having a C-section and being cut through on top of the FSH. I don't have any control left. I'm pretty much wheelchair bound at this point. They're scared to do more damage, so they don't want a regular one, but they only know of two here, and I live in the Phoenix metro area of Arizona, so they recommended 2 neurophysical therapists or something like that, but my insurance doesn't go for them. So I don't know where to look to even find anybody, and I don't know pointers of how to find somebody that's just not a general physical therapist, because they're not typically knowledgeable in FSH.
Right.
They don't want to do more damage.
Okay. Yeah. I would say all valid questions, and I'm glad you're thinking about it before you just, hop in there and go somewhere, because that's kind of what I meant by, can it increase the pace of, if you go too intense, I think anybody can have, not repercussion, I suppose. So to answer your question specifically on that one, no, I don't have a great source as to finding people outside of myself, I guess, because I don't know anybody else that is a licensed physical therapist that knows about FSH. So it's a very common question that actually I receive from people all over the world. And I've actually done all sorts of translations with Google. Google is amazing, just so I can kind of understand what they're trying to ask me. And that's a very common question. So that's a little bit of exactly why I want to do the class. Is I need it to be, you know, enough people that are interested, and then just have it be kind of, you know, exactly like what you just asked. And what I would say there, so I can just kind of give you an answer there a little bit too, is your breathing. Now, that's where I would work on it. I can make someone feel their core by just making them breathe, and I can make you do it right now by just sitting where you're at. And that's where I think would be best. Now, you mentioned wheelchair bound, so that's where you're going to have to be, is in a seated position. You know, if we could get it to the point where your core feels strong enough because you get there, fantastic. You know, I can't promise anything, and I don't ever like to overpromise and underserve. So I'm going to tell you it's going to be work 100%. Now, one thing I would say, and I think you can see me okay, let me see if I can just tilt it down a little bit. Now, I would do something a little bit like so. Now, if your arms are able to move, fantastic. If they're not, I wouldn't worry about that. I would keep them right in the neutral spot, rib cage faces down, and it's literally just inhales and exhales. Now, what we forget about is we don't inhale vertically, and we don't just inhale in the lungs. So getting the diaphragm more so down here, and I like the cue of the bottom ribs to flare them out almost like a handle on a bucket. So when you inhale in through the nose and then exhale out slowly, if you exhale out slowly and maintain a decent position and slowly in a full exhale, you should feel your core, you know, and it might not happen right away. It might take, you know, a little bit of practice, but again,
would you still do that?
Go ahead.
The right side of my diaphragm is completely paralyzed, so it doesn't move at all.
Okay.
Would that still function the same way for something like that?
Yeah. I mean, yes, as long as you don't compensate to get the job done, you know. So what I would say there too is, if do you have the abilities to reach forward with the arms?
Yeah.
Okay. So right there, so I'm going to grab a golf club. If you had a broomstick, okay, and you were able to hold right here, have somebody just barely push one way or the other, and I mean barely, and see, technically, if you were to push away from your right side, that's where your right side would probably activate a little bit. So I would go right hand on top, left hand on bottom, a little bit like so, and I would push this way so that this has to activate, and it might just be literally like a finger push, but then you have to breathe through that finger push and keep this in line with your spine. If that's too intense, there's regressions. So there's something that can be done there. The objection is to get you to feel that, or at least that, or that, you know, all the above. Does it happen the first day? Maybe not. But does it happen in 2 weeks? Maybe a little. And then does it happen in a month? Maybe more than a little. And that is, I have to bring that to my clients' attentions a lot, you know, is I didn't give you a new leg, you know, I didn't give you something, you know, a cortisone shot, you know, does it feel different? And that's, you know, sometimes, you know, massage, foam rolling can be instant, where you're like, oh, wow, that feels good. But sometimes it's not. And we just got to be patient, and it takes some work. But that's something that I would really, you know, if you don't have anybody to push there, you know, you could probably even just kind of push against like a wall that won't move, and then try to activate and just breathe. And it's very light breathing. Start very, very light. If you're able to get a little bit deeper diaphragmatic breathing, you can try, but really keep it very simple and listen to the feedback of your body. If it says good things and you're like, oh my gosh, I actually can kind of get that going, that's exactly it. And that is, you know, I'm glad you asked this question, because that's exactly Bill and the other guy that I mentioned of when he had the accident. You know, he was completely paralyzed. He had zero movement all the way from the toes up to about T6. And that's where we started, was like playing with the feet. And then I would palpate certain muscles, just touch certain muscles, because then that's probably where they came with the physio neuro, because they want the mind kind of body connection, where Bill and I have had great success there, where if he's doing a press, I'll palpate the chest and he'll feel that. And then it starts working more. And then all of a sudden that chest is now doing what we needed it to be doing while making a press. And if it's not, sometimes it ends up getting a little bit, you're overusing the deltoid, or maybe you're compensating with a rib cage over the top, so the scapula go there. So the understanding of the mechanics of exercise is a really big step that Bill and I took, together to get him to get to where he's at today. And I will always tell this to all my clients. I see Bill twice a week. That's 2 hours out of like 150. So it's his job afterwards. It's really him that's created that habit and lifestyle change for himself, which has been amazing to watch. So it's very fun. Was there another question over there? Or was it just a hand up?
Oh, yeah, I had a question, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're okay.
I also know that stretches are really important too. I know you're mentioning a lot of exercises, but I was wondering if you had any go-to stretches that you use a lot.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would say in general, breathing is a great stretch because breathing opens up our diaphragm. And with Bill, that's, I found the kind of the closed shoulders there quite a bit. So I wanted to open up the shoulders. I think, everyone is different. So it's much more kind of think as to like, it's a game of tug of war a little bit. Our skeletal and muscular system is. And if something is too far one way, we sometimes need to stretch that one side out that looks like it's being pulled. But I think the answer that I want to give you more so is try to strengthen the other side. So stretching is fantastic. Stretching definitely gets some opening, some just kind of, blood flow, and the muscles feel a little more loose. So it's not to say stretching is not good. Please do so. But think about the other side of the strengthening aspect. Because if I had a cell phone tower right here and then it's leaned, you think about the cell phone tower and all the wires that we see around those things. And if it's leaned like this, that cell phone tower wire is really tight. Now, instead of just stretching this out, maybe it goes back, I'm going to try to strengthen over here. And now it's back to neutral position. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and do you have anything more specific on that, like stretching? Like if you were to think like somewhere that needed to be stretched on yourself, would it be the hips or more like the feet or the shoulders? Or what makes you kind of ask that question?
Oh, it was really sort of just a general question because for me, where I'm at with my progression right now, it sort of affects me everywhere.
Sure.
But yeah,
Have you ever tried yoga?
yeah. So I have infantile early onset FSHD, and so I was never really strong enough to do yoga or any like. I worked with physical therapists for years, and I just hadn't had much luck with finding people who would be able to work with my progression.
Sure. What did you find when working with it? If you don't, if you don't want to answer some of these questions, feel more than welcome to tell me no, it's okay. But when you were working with physical therapists, did you find some positions or exercises that did seem to be, really helpful for teaching the body?
Yeah, so this was mostly for like my legs and my hamstrings, like standing sort of like a distance apart and getting that like back hamstring stretched out with like my foot completely flat, like both sort of in line with each other.
Got it. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that really helped in terms of walking and helping my gait a lot more.
Okay, yeah, totally.
But yeah, not so much for like, oh, wait, there's one more. Yeah, like so if you have like two corners of the wall and you're like standing with your like elbows and your shoulders up against the wall
Mhm.
and sort of like pressing into the wall
Yep.
to stretch out like this area.
Yeah.
Like I guess for you since like I couldn't do it myself. So that was like another one that I found. That I think over the years, this one with the two walls, it like lost its
effect, rather. It didn't do as much after a bit, which
Yeah.
really, so in my just experience with that's great. And that means that your body did receive change. It did receive, some stress to the body that was able to adapt. Now it's just ready for something a little bit more and more challenging, and that's where you have to be creative and figure out, what can I do there? A lot of what I would say right there would be probably having, either a physical therapist, of course, some kind of a trainer, personal trainer would be fine, or even just a friend, and doing leg presses and arm and push pulls again, kind of like I talked about with Bill. Now, when I mention the arm and push pulls, this is the golf club again, but it's kind of like that. Now, if I was this hand here and this is Bill's hand, he's pushing forward, and then that allows for rotation of the ribs. It allows for our chest to work, and then when we go forward there, it stretches back here. And then if you were to do a pull, which is here, it stretches up here. So that's a little bit of what I meant by, anytime we have one muscle stretching, we have one muscle shortening, which is technically strengthening, unless we're just using something to force us into that stretch, which is okay too. But what I would say to you is try to incorporate something where it can focus on some strengthening aspects of it too. Because anytime, like if you were to lay on your back and have someone put, their hand on your foot, and if they need to control the knee too, or if you can't lay on the back flat, maybe in like an inclined chair or a bed, and try some leg presses. So I did that for probably about 1.5 years with my gentleman that was paralyzed, and I did it with Bill, still do it with him today. And it's just an easy tracking leg press, so that you have to be mindful as to where your body is in space, and you're making a longer and shortened range of the muscle groups. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's where I would start with. I mean, again, this is it's you got to be creative, and you got to sometimes guess and check a little bit. And say, did that work, or can I change that a little bit to make this more effective? And I think that's right where you're at right now. You had some change. You had a great exercise. Now it just needs a little bit more without being way too much more and not able to do. Sound okay?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Absolutely, of course. That's where I would start at least, and then if we are not able to find a second stage, you can always find me on FSH Fitness on Instagram and send me a message, and I can give you some other leads in the right direction.
I appreciate that.
Of course. So I see. Okay, cool. So this was just for the perfect. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it on the questions there then. And I covered most of my, kind of parts there with the basics. I mean, I'm just going to kind of reiterate real quickly. The basics is really what I want most people focused on right now. If you're past the basics, then we can totally chat again. But with more experience, or more times than not, I think people think that you have to do so much to create change. And I would have smaller focuses and maybe just a couple of exercises for a week or 2 or 3 or 4, and see if you can develop them into either easier to do, you feel change, you see change, or we got to find a different exercise or a different approach, because there is an exercise out there for everybody. There is an exercise for every pain, just because usually if there's pain, it's kind of like that cell phone tower. One wire is working too much, one wire is not working enough, so figuring out whether it's misuse, underuse, or overuse is definitely a big factor when it comes to balancing the body and then creating things to be a little bit more functional. Perfecto.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, Mitch. That was
Absolutely.
great. That was really informative.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to share all this action, and I mean, I'm happy to answer some more questions. I just don't want to overwhelm. I think there's a lot of information out there If you have more specific questions, please, again, feel free to, find me on Instagram or my email, mwadefit@gmail.com is totally fine, but a lot of the answers is, you've got to get yourself in there. You've got to start the process. You've got to feel some of the struggles. You're going to have some. It's what makes you, it's what's going to make you better. But you got to get in there and feel what's going to work, what's not going to work, and then how to work your way up to making those things that weren't working to make them start to work.
Okay.
Yeah, really, just like echoing Aaron's comment, just really appreciate you taking the time, Mitch. And also, I think as he was mentioning, if you have questions in the future, like later on, I think he's on a lot of these types of meetings with the other groups as well, and then also the podcast. So either like I have his email, if you ever send them to me, I can pass them along or anything like that. Then it might can
Sounds
go
great.
into a future video.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, I thank everybody very much. It's always a pleasure. And please, don't hesitate if you have any extended questions. I know there's a lot of information and I just said a whole bunch, real quickly. So even if there's questions on specifically what I said, don't hesitate. I'd love to help.
Yeah, thanks
Great.
again.
Absolutely. Everybody have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.